El ofrecimiento para presidir esta primera mañana de trabajos pues es un verdadero honor, porque tengo la satisfacción de que, bueno, pues de volver a reencontrarme a personas como el profesor Hachinicolau, que conocí hace mucho tiempo en Grecia, la última vez precisamente ya en Atenas en el 2007, si no recuerdo mal, con motivo también de unas actividades que se organizaron entre la Embajada Española, el Instituto Cervantes, que yo presidía a la sazón allí en Atenas, y antes cuando el gran congreso de Recim, ¿no?, en los años 90. Igualmente nos van a acompañar en esta mañana la profesora Maria Constantoudaki de la Universidad de Atenas y la profesora Angeliki Limberopoulo, especialista también en arte bizantino, y que actualmente trabaja en la Open University del Reino Unido. Esta primera sesión, evidentemente, como apuntaba Fernando, no afecta todavía de lleno al mundo del nuestro Greco más cercano y permanente, pero es clave, puesto que son sus propios orígenes, su vinculación con su tierra y especialmente con el contexto, el ambiente cultural, el tipo de lenguaje y concepción que ofrecerá a lo largo de su vida, con modificaciones, innovaciones impresionantes, que es lo que le caracteriza, y que es, digamos, esta mentalidad o cultura propia de la ortodoxia griega, con el añadido, además, de su patria, Creta, dentro del mundo griego del siglo finales del XV, del XVI y principio del XVII, es bastante distinto del resto del mundo helénico, puesto que, en definitiva, desde el siglo XIII llevaba siendo uno de los puntos claves de Venecia en todo el Mediterráneo oriental. Esa convivencia de más de 400 años del mundo veneciano con el mundo griego insular, tan característico en muchos aspectos y sobre todo por sus propios dialectos, etcétera, como es Creta, realmente producen una síntesis, no solamente en el Greco, en otros autores coetáneos, pero especialmente en él, un germen y unos elementos que van a ser motrices y absolutamente radicales en su manera de manifestarse. Precisamente este contexto inicial, nuclear, pero que marcará una serie de hilos, de líneas de fuerza a lo largo de toda la vida y producción de nuestro pintor, es lo que precisamente se va a abordar en esta primera sesión. Entonces, tengo ya el honor de presentarles a la profesora Maria Constantoudaki, Carlos Irzate, egetetólogo. Nos va a hablar sobre precisamente la espinosa cuestión de la etapa veneciana del Greco, a caballo entre su Creta natal y la propia Venecia.
Thank you. My title is Early El Greco, the thorny field of his Venetian period. Venice, the splendid capital of the Serenissima Repubblica di San Marco and metropolis of numerous possessions in the Eastern Mediterranean, including the island of Crete, was the first great exodus in Domenikos Theotokopoulos' European journey. The time the Cretan master spent in Venice was shorter by comparison to the other stations of his life, and it can be and it can be characterized as a cloudy period in his biography. Only 2 documents refer to those years, and these in an indirect manner. The one of August 1568, when Domenicus was already for some time there, and the other of November 1570, when he had left the city and had arrived in Rome. The first of August, August 1568, an official resolution from the archives of the Duke of Crete concerns the delivery of some drawings that Theotokopoulos had sent from Venice back to Candia to the well-known Cretan cartographer Georgios Sideros or Sideris Kalapodas. Now you can see a map of the Mediterranean by him, dated 1568. Via a third person, Manolis Datsipris Mantzapetas, attested as merchant in other documents. Yes. The painter was already established in Venice for some time, since he had been able to search the market and acquire some apparently specific drawings, send them back to Crete through a seemingly trusted person who, however, retained the drawings. The beneficiary turned to the Venetian authorities of Crete in order to secure their delivery, and thus the case has come down to us. Another document from the Cretan archives, dated 12 July 1567, perhaps allows us to date El Greco's travel from Crete to Venice earlier than this date. On that day, by order of the Venetian authorities, Domenicos' brother, Manousos Theotokopoulos, a tax farmer for the Venetian authorities and merchant, was compelled to deliver to Ioannes Sklavos, president of the Painters' Guild of Candia, modern Heraklion, the things that he withheld under threat of a penalty of 25 ducats. These things belonged to the Painters' Guild of Candia and might have had some relationship with Domenicos, who must have been a member of his professional association. This piece of evidence suggests that Domenicos probably had already departed from Heraklion for Venice sometime before July of 1567. The second document concerning young El Greco, young Theotokopoulos in Venice, dated 16 November 1750, is the well-known recommendation letter written in Rome by Giulio Clovio to his patron, Cardinal Alessandro Farnese, who was then in Viterbo. The Croatian artist recommended warmly the young Candiot painter as a disciple of Titian and a rare talent in painting, discepolo di Titiano, raro nella pittura. This is all we possess, and the rest we have to guess from an unstable corpus of very few signed works, almost none of them dated, and the number of attributed works, almost all of them evaluated in a different way and given diverse chronologies by scholars. Difficulties, however, do not finish here. Even the signed works have at times been considered not by him and were attributed to other hypothetical painters, presumably by the same name. Furthermore, the only date found on one of the paintings to be considered is unusual in its form and creates a puzzle for researchers. The length and specific period of time Theotokopoulos spent in Venice obviously touches on the issue of his artistic production in the city. If we accept that he was in Venice from the spring of 1567 onwards, and since we know that by November 1570 he had already moved to Rome, then his stay in Venice lasted only for 3 to 3.5 years. There is even an hypothesis of an alleged departure from Venice and return to Venice. It was, however, a fruitful stay, with a significant impact on the development of his painting and his artistic personality in general. The specific reasons for him moving to Venice can only be surmised. The metropolis was a magnet for ambitious professionals and artists, and several Cretan painters had attempted the same route in the first half of the 16th century, including Marcos Strelitzas Bathas and Simeon, the son of notable painter Theophanis Strelitzas Bathas. Domenicos had already given signs of his taste for Italian art and culture, having used various relevant models for his early compositions in Crete. In Venice, he found himself in a cultural environment much more stimulating and demanding from the one of his very beginnings, although Venetian Crete, and especially the city of Candia, had achieved an excellent level, mainly in icon painting. I just remind you a few examples by painters of the period just before or of the generation of Theotokopoulos. But also, yes. So we saw examples by Theophanis Strelitzas Bathas, the most famous Cretan painter of the middle of the first half and the middle of the 16th century, and Marcos Strelitzas Bathas, who also was established in Venice at the time Theotokopoulos was there, and also just two examples from the work of Michael Damaskinos, a contemporary of El Greco, who also followed the same route from Candia to Venice. Now, Crete also had remarkable production in architecture and sculpture, wood carving and applied arts. I just show a few examples from sculpture, produced in the 16th and up to the beginning of the 17th century. You can see there we also have a copy of a Dürer's engraving. So that means not only in painting, we have engravings used by Cretan artists, but also in sculpture. And as you know, there was an important production, important literary production in literature and drama as well. Despite his well-valued work in Crete, deduced by documents, I think I have a few examples from sculpture. Well, despite his well-valued work, as we know from documents, he decided to undertake the passage to Venice, almost certainly, as we said, in the spring of 1567. As regards his artistic output, from his Venetian period, there are no historically documented works. Scarce evidence and remaining gaps still cause uneasiness to scholars. This is reflected first in difficulties of identifying or reluctance to accept works as products of this period, and subsequently in changing opinions concerning attributions and datings of such works. The situation was even more shadowed by attributions, especially in the past, of panels of inferior quality or even bearing false signatures with Theotokopoulos' name. Consequently, many a scholar trying to approach this period of early El Greco feel as if they are walking on a field interspersed with thorns, hence the title of the present talk. Nevertheless, even if short and much less documented than any other period of his life, it was undoubtedly a significant formative stage for him. During this time span, the young Cretan painter trained primarily in the Byzantine tradition, but with some experience of Western art in his native island, deeply impressed by direct contact with the work of great Venetian masters, Titian, Bassano, Veronese, Tintoretto, strove to acquire new dexterities and articulate an artistic vocabulary of his own. Despite attempts over the years and progress made in recent decades, which saw a rather intense activity in El Greco studies, with publications by a great number of scholars, with conferences around the world, and also, as we heard before by Fernando Marias, and also with international exhibitions, the persona of El Greco in Venice is still elusive. It is indicative in this respect that much of what is considered as belonging to his early production continues to generate contradictory remarks, challenge, doubt, acceptance, rejection, or reconsideration and reacceptance. Furthermore, some works, obviously not by him, judging from their quality and style, but rather mediocre products of icon painters working in Venice with an Italianate taste, are still exhibited with an attribution to El Greco in some museums. Among all these difficulties, what a modern art historian can hope for? Not much, perhaps, but even a few steps are always desirable in our effort to understand Greco's production in Venice, both in specific and in more general terms. This talk attempts a further look at some aspects of El Greco's early artistic output, presumably or actually produced in Venice, on the basis of a few observations and questions resulting from the appearance of new works and their reception, as well as the re-evaluation of old ones. My aim is simply to share with you some remarks on the Cretan artist's early maturity and steady determination to assimilate the Italian painting traditions of his time. The few signed works which can, in my opinion, be attributed to the Venetian phase of Theotokopoulos, 1567-1570, although otherwise undocumented and variably considered by scholars, are known and repeatedly published and are the following. First, the famed two-sided Modena triptych, a small folding type of work used for private devotion, on wood, dimensions 37 per 24 centimeters when open, lateral wings 24 per 18 centimeters only. It bears the signature Hir Dominicou, the hand of Domenicus, which is a very early type of signature of Theotokopoulos. This delightful work of art, after some oscillation of opinions, acquired the place it deserves in Theotokopoulos' oeuvre, with the majority of scholars accepting it within his Venetian period. See the emphasis on color, for instance, and light, while a few place it in his Cretan period. It serves as a point of reference for comparisons concerning El Greco's Venetian phase and confirms his use of Italian and other European prints. I just show you just a few examples. The second already published by Fernando Marias. That one is by Aldegrever, a Northern European artist, the second one. The others, and the one on the left by a German artist, but the one on the right by an Italian artist. Allora. Second, let me see if I have other pictures of the triptych, the Modena triptych. Yes, there are a few details. Oh, well. Second, a small panel of St. Francis receiving the stigmata on wood, dimensions 29 per 21 centimeter, in the collection Suarez Zuloaga in Switzerland, formerly in Zuloaga's collection in Paris, signed Dominikos Theotokopoulos EP on your left. And third, a similar panel with St. Francis receiving the stigmata on wood, dimensions 29 per 20 centimeters, in Maples, Istituto Suor Orsola Benincasa, signed equally Dominikos Theotokopoulos EP on your right. And there are some details of the two St. Francis panels. The signatures are on the left, on the lower left on both panels. And the fourth, is a Pietà with the dead Christ embraced by Virgin Mary, St. John the Evangelist, and Mary Magdalene, on wood as well, dimensions 29 per 20 centimeters, in the Philadelphia Museum of Art, signed Dominikos Theotokopoulos, possibly with a P. And fifth, all these are very well-known paintings by El Greco. The expulsion of the merchants from the temple in the National Gallery, Washington, on wood, dimensions 65.4 per 83.2, signed Dominikos Theotokopoulos, Greece. These are, in my view, the signed works most plausibly belonging to his Venetian period, although most of them have also been placed at the beginning or even in the middle of his Roman sojourn, 1570-1576. Apart from this, the adoration of the Magi of the Benaki Museum was occasionally shifted from his Cretan period to his Venetian phase, but I think the established opinion is the most probable. It is true that for similar investigations, the main guide, stylistic analysis, has its limits, always involving a degree of personal judgment according to intellectual formation and ways of seeing. Having said that, I confess I put the works just mentioned in an arbitrary classification, judging from some external elements as well as their general stylistic appearance as it seems to me. This, besides being convenient in order to study them, it also makes a certain amount of sense from a substantial point of view. The first four of them are of a very small size, of similar dimensions, roughly 30 per 20 centimeters, and indeed 3 are of identical size, probably originating from the same carpenter's workshop, the one on the lower part. All of them display a miniaturistic execution and are painted either with tempera on wood or with mixed medium on wood, and I'm not sure whether all of them have been examined technically. Their signatures, always in capital letters, seem to evolve from the form Hir Dominikou, that is by the hand of Domenicos, in the Modena triptych, which is found in 2 works of his Cretan period as well, St. Luke painting the Virgin and the Adoration of the Magi in the Benaki Museum we just saw, to the form Dominikos Theotokopoulos Epi, in both panels with St. Francis, with the use of the verb pein in its ancient Greek meaning to create. The 5th painting, with the expulsion of the merchants, becomes bigger in size, and its signature evolves from Dominikos Theotokopoulos Epi to Dominikos Theotokopoulos Chris, which is used for the first time here, if I'm not mistaken. Later, he will also use Dominikos Theotokopoulos Chris Epi, the most complete form. Does this couple of observations suffice to indicate a chronological sequence? Desirable as this might be, things are not that simple. These remarks can only be considered as auxiliary and as indications to be combined with other factors towards establishing, as far as possible, a successive production, which remains a rather hard task for the moment. The main role must be played by comparative research, stylistic analysis, and multifaceted examination, which may or may not confirm the impression gained by what the naked eye sees, surveys. Considering their subjects, all 5 paintings exhibit the current iconography of the period in West European and especially Italian art. As independent works, the first 4 contain from 2 to 4 figures of devotional subjects. The last one displays a more ambitious, multi-figured composition. The size of these paintings are an indication, the sizes, for their commissions. The smaller ones for private use and prayer in an intimate setting, the larger probably for use in a private chapel or for dedication to a church. The fact that Theotokopoulos has put signatures in such small works, furthermore in Greek, is an indication of his cultural identity, professional self-awareness, and a statement of wish to start making a name in a very competitive artistic environment where giants like Titian dominated. Among the first four mentioned, the most complex in its iconography is the Modena triptych, repeatedly studied and published. It is worth stressing once more the central scene. On the inner face, the allegory of the Christian knight, here Christ, in a resurrection type, defeating Abyss. I'm not sure how I can show you, but you can see it in the middle. Symbolizes the heavenly church triumphant, an idea connected with the climate of the Counter-Reformation of the Roman Catholic Church following the Council of Trent in 1563, while the kneeling Christian soldier, whom the Lord rewards with a crown, symbolizes the earthly church militant. Its main source had been identified in the corresponding scene in a woodcut after a drawing by Giovanni Battista Franco Il Semolei, published in 1555 in Venice. The original drawing is found in the Pierpont Morgan Library in New York and was studied by Jan Loder. The printed version is encircled by texts from the Gospel of Matthew and letters of St. Paul, as you can see in the image on the far right, where there is emphasis inter alia on the value of faith, which appears personified in the foreground of the panel in company with the other two theological virtues, hope and charity, on the lower part in both representations. On the outer side, the central panel, no, I have to go back. A view of the mountain, a monastery of Mount Sinai, with the giving of the law on the right to Moses is represented, which remains visible when the triptych is closed. A print like the one by Giovanni Battista Fontana I think, yes, that's in the middle. 1569, or a related drawing has been discussed as a possible source. A correlation can be noticed between the depictions of Moses of Mount Sinai and on the one hand and Jesus on the other, on the two faces of the central panel, since the prophet, the leader savior of the Israelites, was considered in ecclesiastical hymnography to be a prefiguration of Christ the Savior. All this suggests the sophisticated environment within which this work was conceived, perhaps as a collaboration between the painter and the commissioner, who probably had theological knowledge. The emphasis on splendid tones and on the reflections of light so characteristic of Venetian painting indicates a direct familiarity with works of the Venetian school, suggesting its execution in Venice itself. A proposal of linking the triptych to the Patriarch of Aquileia, Giovanni Grimani, is made by Fernando Marias in his most recent book, 2014. The dazzling color combinations we saw, I'm not sure I have, no, we saw everything before. The fluidity of brush strokes, the fluency in drawing and painterly execution, the Venetian stylistic and iconographic references indicated in literature, the perspective view with lateral axes, all indicate a new perception and a new path for the young Cretan. The two little panels with St. Francis receiving the stigmata reproduce a widespread subject, a favorite in Franciscan circles, but also to Roman Catholic faith in general. It was known to Theotokopoulos from his early youth in Crete, where an impressive monastery in Candia and others in other parts of Crete had promoted the cult of St. Francis, even among Orthodox in Crete, as proved by frescoes in Byzantine churches and by portable icons. This is the other one, St. Francis. And you have just seen two prints, a Northern European print and an Italian print you see here. This is already discussed in bibliography as a possible source for the figure on the right. Well, yes, we have two Cretan panels with St. Francis receiving the stigmata. However, it is here treated in a new manner. Sorry, I have to go back. Let's stop to it. With elements from prints with an emphasis on nature, depicting trees against a luminous sky, a typical Venetian detail, which present affinities with vegetation in the scenes of paradise and the baptism in the Modena triptych, although here the foliage is finer. Sorry. The almost monochromatic color impression evokes the landscape of Mount Sinai in the triptych. Between the two St. Francis panels, even within their almost identical rendering, the painter makes some alterations. The flowered bushes in the Zuloaga collection on the left, in the Zuloaga panel, disappear in the Napoli version, where a small torrent is introduced. You can make it out on the right. Sorry. In the arid landscape. In both paintings, Theotokopoulos puts a high rock behind the figure of St. Francis, which may recall an old device of the Byzantine tradition to indicate separation of different picture planes. The Pietà a subject pertinent to private devotion is known in various iconographic types and versions. From a document of December 1566, we learn that Domenicus had painted a Passione del Nostro Signor Gesù Cristo, which does not survive, but may have been similar to the subject of Cristo Passionato, described in archival documents, or Christ of the Passion, perhaps an adaptation of Christ in Pietà or Man of Sorrows, found in Cretan painting under Italian influence. The version in the Philadelphia panel is a combination of the deposition from the cross and the lament over the dead Christ, and illustrates a transitory moment after the crucifixion and before entombment. Theotokopoulos opts here for a pyramidal rendering, putting the four figures in a tight cluster with emphasis on deep sentiment, tender gesture of modeling, a careful removing of the crown of thorns by John with his right hand, and on suffering, expression of Mary. Affinities with the Modena triptych can be detected in the choice of the pink, yellow, and orange colors. On the left you have the Pietà, on the right the details from the Modena triptych. But the rendering of illuminated surfaces on fabrics differs, for instance, in Modelin's mantle. More evident is the difference in the treatment of Christ's body, which in the Pietà has much more plasticity. Michelangelesque features are probably transmitted through prints, such as one of the same subject by Giulio Bonazzone, you see in the middle, and on the left, of course, there is a drawing by Michelangelo on the right, the famous Pietà by him. Theotokopoulos depicted the same composition also later on the painting you see on top on your right. The expulsion of the merchants from the temple, oh, I don't have it. Anyhow, we saw it before, renders the subject in a well-orchestrated composition with movement, exploration of space, architecture, perspective, etc., with which every decent professional of the period should have mastered. It also conforms with the iconography and meaning of the subject for ecclesiastical politics after the Council of Trent, 1563. In subsequent years, Theotokopoulos, as you know, painted the subject more times in slightly different or more refined versions. In this limited specimen of his Venetian output, the Cretan master expressed more clearly than in earlier works, such as those produced in Crete, his preference for Renaissance and Mannerist tendencies, and demonstrated further abilities not only as a painter, but also as a cultured individual, receptive to new ideas, modern atriptych, expulsion painting. Sorry. Despite abundant borrowings from engravings, which have been indicated by various scholars, and the obvious influence of Venetian art, there is unquestionably a personal touch as well, lying in the ability to produce new compositions with an individual taste of color and handling of the brush stroke. However, with only stylistic elements at our disposal, we are on a slippery ground with varying chronologies. As an example, I mentioned that in the most recent catalogue raisonné in the monumental work by the late José Álvarez Lopera, both panels with St. Francis are put between 1570-72, the Philadelphia Pietà between 1572-73, and the expulsion of the merchants from the temple in Washington is dated to about 1570-71, just before the healing of the man born blind in Parma, which gives a date of 1571-72. That is, none of them are dated in the Venetian period. And I only clarify here that Nikos Hadjinikolaou had dated the St. Francis panel in Napoli to Greco's Venetian years, 1567-1570. One may wonder if such difficulties as the ones described before present themselves for signed pieces. What about an existing great number of unsigned works attributed to Theotokopoulos' Venetian phase? We are not without help, however. Most exhibitions gave space for his Italian period, including the Venetian one, albeit with rather limited examples. The one entitled El Greco in Italy and Italian Art, catalogue 1997, combined with a conference under the same title in Rethymno, whose proceedings were published in 1999, both organized by Nikos Hadjinikolaou, the proceedings of the relevant conference in Rethymno, 1999, also the recent monographs by Álvarez Lopera, 2005 and 2007, and by Marias, 1997 and then 2013, and other studies by a number of scholars treated various aspects and offered very useful observations. Concerning attributions themselves, we noticed that all attributions, either generally rejected or generally accepted, of unsigned pieces are discussed anew in the light of recent studies and put in the context of El Greco's Venetian production. In this connection, convincing observations have been made by various scholars who reconfirmed the attributions, such as the cases, for instance, of the following works put in chronological order of publication of the relevant special studies or substantial exhibition catalogue entries. The Adoration of the Magi from the Lazzaro Galdiano collection in Madrid. The attribution of the panel known from the 1930s had been challenged, but penetrating observations made by José Álvarez Lopera in 1993 and 1995 reaffirmed it in a convincing manner. His entry in the catalogue of 1999-2000 gives a date between 1567 and 1570, while his last book, 2007, narrows the space to between 1568 and 1569. The Adoration of the Shepherds from the collection of Jens Ferdinand Willumsen, an artist who has been a pioneer for the study of El Greco's youthful production, and now in the Willumsen Museum in Frederikssund, Denmark. The old attribution had been denied by the comparative research of Nikos Hadjinikolaou in 1995, confirmed it in a persuasive manner. In the exhibition catalogue, he dates the piece between 1567 and 1570. Lopera's dating, 2007, is 1569 to 1570. And I just put here a small observation I made. You see these two figures watching the scene, and we can see that they are in Adoration of the Shepherds in print after a drawing by Parmigianino. Well, Christ in the house of Martha and Maria, known since 1926, when it was attributed by Augustus Meyer, was met with acceptance, doubt, and finally acceptance again after comparative study by Nikos Hadjinikolaou, 1995, who placed it in El Greco's Italian period without further specification. Álvarez Lopera in 1993 dated it between 1567 and 70, but in 2007 he shifted his dating to about 1570 to 71, thus suggesting subtraction of the piece from Greco's Venetian phase. Always changes. It should be further noted that Fernando Marias, 1999, is very skeptical about the work altogether with regard to El Greco. That's another observation he made recently. I'm not sure it's convincing. It's from a print by Bonazzone concerning the figure on the left. The Adoration of the Shepherds in Kettering, United Kingdom, collection of the Duke of Buccleuch. Where is it? Oh, sorry. Something is happening because I noticed I cannot find some. Anyhow, this is the Adoration of the Shepherds, not this one, I'm talking about this. David Davis, the foremost scholar on El Greco in Britain, studied the painting, which is on canvas in 1995 and published in 1999, on the light of technical evidence, but gave it rather to Greco's Roman period. The Last Supper we see now in the National Gallery, Bologna, has been re-evaluated in 1995 and 99 and related to the context of other works from Greco's early Venetian years. The flight to Egypt, these are some of the sources, and an engraving by Marcantonio Raimondi on your right, and this is, of course, Last Supper by, one of the Last Suppers by Thyssen. The flight to Egypt, once in different private collections, has been acquired by the Prado about a dozen years ago, studied and confirmed on that occasion, when it was placed around 1568-69. The painting with the Sinai landscape, now in the historic, here is the Adoration of the Shepherds of the Duke of Buccleuch, published by David Davis. Sorry about that, there is some. And we miss. Maybe we didn't put the right PowerPoint, but okay. I'll tell you that the painting with the Sinai landscape, I hope to see it later, now in the Historical Museum of Crete in Heraklion, was never seriously challenged, but it has been placed in the Roman period despite a strong Venetian feeling. Parallel to this, works not well known or previously unrecorded in the El Greco bibliography have been brought forward. Deprived of signature, but obviously recalling his style, they attracted the attention of scholars. Some of these pieces with plausible attributions are the following: the Entombment of Christ in the National Gallery in Athens. The work, which seems to have been known since the 19th century, was presented in 1995 in Athens in the exhibition El Greco in Italy and Italian Art, and in 1999 in the exhibition El Greco Identity and Transformation, held in Madrid, Rome, and Athens. In the catalogues accompanying these exhibitions, the main features of this painting, as well as its sources, were identified. You see some, you saw one of the prints, and it was placed around 1568 to 70. A triptych with scenes from the Passion of Christ, housed in the National Gallery of Ferrara, on loan from the Casa di Risparmio di Ferrara, which I studied in the exhibition catalogue of 1999, and also attributed to El Greco's Venetian period. Some of the arguments which support, to my view, this attribution are briefly exposed there. My intention to return to this work has not been fulfilled yet, and the bibliography has referred to it only in a few instances. Álvarez Lopera, who accepted the work in the 1999 catalogue, avoided it in his last book. Silence for a work which presents close similarities with the Modena triptych and the Bologna Last Supper and others, as I hope to demonstrate elsewhere, eloquently illustrates the uncertainty still prevailing with regard to Theotokopoulos' Venetian period. A little panel with the baptism of Christ, there are more pictures of the Ferrara triptych and some of its sources found in engravings by Dürer, Marcantonio Raimondi, and Giovanni Battista d'Angeli. A little panel with the baptism of Christ, Heraklion, Historical Museum of Crete, I'm finishing, deposited in the municipality of Heraklion, dimensions 23 per 18. Once part of a, sorry, here is the Mount Sinai landscape, the independent picture. Sorry, there have been some mixing up of the pictures. Now you're talking about the little panel with the baptism. The two sides were separated probably in the 19th century, and the same happened with the Ferrara triptych we just saw. It was first attributed by Paul Rezon in 2004 and shortly thereafter jointly by Maria Vasilaki and Robin Cormack. A little later, a study by Nikos Hadjinikolaou posed inquiring issues. The work can be accepted within Theotokopoulos' Venetian output. The baptism demonstrates the strong impact of the chromatic values and luminous reflections of Venetian painting while sharing the same azure color with other works from the Menikos Venetian period. To the same triptych belonged the panel with the adoration of the shepherds. I can't find it neither. I think we put the wrong PowerPoint. We didn't put the final PowerPoint. Sorry about that. Now, there's an adoration of the shepherds, which goes with the panel of the baptism in Canada. And then we have the entombment. We have, sorry, I can't show it, the entombment of Christ, a new one, which is not a new one, it was known in the past, but it was published in color by Álvarez Lopera in his last book, which presents a similar sense of color with emphasis on blue, recalling lapis lazuli. I'm sorry you cannot see it right now. On the contrary, the adoration of the Magi, another adoration known in the past, but again published in color by Álvarez Lopera, on the contrary, has other colors in which dominate the intense rosy of the Laca di Garanza, and which acquires a special texture, and also the golden orange ochre and dark green. All these attributions should be seen, in my view, in a positive way with regard to acceptance and placement in El Greco's Venetian period. However, even these were met with skepticism or hesitation. What makes experienced scholars who have been watching and studying El Greco works so closely hesitate and change their mind? As you have seen, the paintings which have been judged as belonging to El Greco's Venetian period may show different tendencies. Inevitable differences in style between the proposed works, even some weaknesses and inequalities, reflect the fact that this has been a still formative period, a period of new experimentation and consequently of different artistic expression. On the other hand, this reveals the uncertainty still existing among some scholars about his preferences, as well as a still lingering difficulty of establishing specific criteria which would facilitate the acceptance or rejection of a proposed painting in El Greco's Venetian production. Drawing this survey to its end, I leave out a number of other issues related to the presence of the Cretan artist in Venice, his patrons, his acquaintances, his possible relationship to Venetian colleagues, or even to other Cretan artists in Venice. I may only add another thought. Grouping works according to the artist's preferences and attraction to one painter or another, to one tradition or another. For this, it is needed to observe and to try to place some pieces in groups with common stylistic elements on the basis of their choice of colors. For instance, the use of blue, which enriches his palette in certain works, the Baptism, Christ in the house of Mary and Martha, Flight into Egypt. I doubt that we'll see them here, but I had put them. Sorry about that. So you cannot really follow what I'm saying now. Anyhow. and continues to be used in other works of his Venetian period, like of the healing of the man born blind in Dresden, and beyond that period, for instance, in the painting of the same subject in Parma, and other later works where it becomes, this blue color becomes much more brilliant. Also, emphasis on particular tendencies we can follow, for instance, attraction by Titian, or by Jacopo Bassano, or by Tintoretto, or by mannerists like Parmigianino or Schiavone. Can a reasonable conclusion be drawn after surveying all these aforementioned difficulties, changes of mind, and shifts of attribution and dating, including suggestions proposed in this paper? Is it possible to establish some valid and applicable criteria which could serve as general guidelines? In order to assign any painting to Theotokopoulos' oeuvre, we should first study its style. The most important thing, however, is not only to identify some special features of the painter's art, but also to see if and how any work can be placed into the framework of his artistic production. This last thought helps at least to keep out some exaggerated attributions which cannot be supported. It is true that the paintings signed or attributed to this period on a general consensus share common elements, such as what is generally considered quality of the work, independently of the context in which the work might have been produced. A strong interest in the reflections of light and brilliant coloring accentuated in his Venetian production, a painterly sense with disregard for precise outlines, a free preliminary underdrawing wherever it has been possible to view it, fluency of the brushstroke and rapidity of execution, a preference for particular color combinations, as well as a mannerist breadth. We can see there is a particular use of colors in all of them. However, eventually, the Cretan artist transforms all loans by means of his great capacity for synthesis, his brilliant sense of color, and his special style, which owes much to the established painterly rendering of the Venetian school. All this allows us to follow the attitude of Theotokopoulos in Venice. Living in the capital of the Venetian Maritime Republic, he was experimenting with elements of mannerism and the great Venetian tradition, using, as he had done before, Italian and North European engravings, and being interested in the chromatic values, interplay of light and color and luminous reflections, as he was avidly looking at any source, seeking his personal way of expression, which was ultimately realized in Spain. Thank you very much, and sorry about that.